Hey everyone, welcome to Explore and Learn. If you're new here, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more amazing content. Now, let's dive in as we explore.
How long to water landscape plants? This presentation follows landscape watering basics, and it covers just the calculation of runtime for landscape plants, including trees, shrubs, and ground cover. Here's a quick review from landscape watering basics. Quick rule of thumb to follow when it comes to watering is to water small plants to a depth of 1 foot, medium plants to a depth of 2 feet, and large plants to a depth of 3 feet. Where you water matters as much as how deeply you water. So be sure to water at the drip line of the plant, also known as the drip ring, which is located at the edge of the plant canopy. So how long to water your landscape plant really depends on a couple things: the output of the watering method and how many gallons approximately are needed to wet the root zone of your plant. You want to do that every time you water. And by doing that, you can water less frequently and have healthier plants. In order to determine that first component, how long to water, you'll need to know how fast your watering system applies water. That's because different methods of watering range widely in the amount of time it takes to deliver a certain amount of water. For example, there's a huge difference between the output of a drip emitter, a bubbler, or garden hose. Hoses and bubblers release water in gallons per minute. A drip irrigation emitter releases water in gallons per hour. Sprinkler heads and nozzles report flow rates by gallons per minute and application rates by inches per hour. You simply can't program an irrigation controller properly without knowing the rate at which your watering system is applying water. A very simplified example, but if you wanted to apply to your landscape 10 gallons of water, you would need to know how fast water is coming out to know how long it's going to take. With a hose, it could take about 2 minutes. Single pop-up sprinkler head, perhaps 3 minutes. A 1 gallon per minute bubbler would take 10 minutes. A 1 gallon per hour drip emitter would take 600 minutes or 10 hours. And two 2 gallons per hour drip emitters would take 150 minutes or 2 hours and 30 minutes. And that's a trick with drip emitters. We will review that in just a couple slides. But the trick with it is it's not just the drip emitter, it's how many drip emitters are on that plant. That's the real calculation of how much water is coming out and being received by that plant within an hour. The second component is to know the approximate gallons needed to wet that drip line, that root zone for the different types of plants and sizes. And for that, we have a table. Gallons of water required to wet the root zone located in our landscape watering guidelines on the screen here, which you can screenshot or reflect back on in the video that will be posted on YouTube. Or you can request the booklet from us, or even go online. I'll show you how to go online to find the booklet in a couple minutes. Let's start with estimating watering system outputs. For many landscape plants, trees, shrubs, ground cover, drip systems is the watering method of choice. And that's because they're a form of micro irrigation that discharges water at very slow rates. They are excellent for our desert environment because our clay soils here in the valley, they accept water at very, very slow rates. And so the drip system is aligned to that. It will drip out a small amount of water and allow it to sink in. However, drip systems are often not as efficient as they seem because they are complex. They have a lot of components. They require a lot of maintenance. There's a lot that can go wrong with them. So if not properly maintained, they may actually be wasting quite a bit of water. For drip emitters and finding out their drip output, you'll want to estimate the flow rate based on the speed that the water is coming out of the emitters. It's really the only way to do it if you have an existing system. As you walk around and look at how fast the water is coming out of each of the emitters, that is also an opportunity for you to see where missing emitters are, where mixed emitters might be on the same plant, where things might not be flowing as appropriately. If you notice that some plants are getting a lot more water than other plants, it could be the emitters. It could also be a pressure issue. As you walk around and take a look at the system, if you notice that the system is just not performing the way that you expect, the way that it should be, you could take the opportunity to replace your emitters with emitters that you know the gallons per hour flow rate because you'll be purchasing them. You can also make sure that they're pressure compensating, which means that they will evenly distribute water throughout the system, no matter what the pressure is available at that particular place. You can also take it to the store if you're not sure and see if they can help you figure out the flow rate. But while you're there, again, you might just want to replace them. They're not very expensive, and if your system is rather old, this can help up that efficiency. It's important to remember that your larger plants will need quite a bit of water. Let's go back real quick to that table C, gallons of water required to wet the root zone. If you look at your trees, your 20-foot tree, you're going to need 235 gallons. And if you're watering that with a drip system that is producing a couple gallons per hour, you're going to need a lot of drip emitters to finish that watering cycle in an efficient manner. You really shouldn't be watering for days. You want to finish that watering cycle between 4 to 6 hours so that your plant can get the water it needs, and then you can also take advantage of those deep root systems and nice moisture in the second and third feet of depth. Let's come back here. So this is a chart that's located in the same guide, and it is giving you an idea of how many emitters you'll need for different sizes of plants so that you can efficiently water them. So let's talk about bubblers. Bubblers apply 1/2 gallon to 2 gallons per minute. Occasionally I see bubblers on the same valve, same watering zone as a drip emitter, and it's impossible to be efficient with those mixed together. One applies a couple gallons per hour, one applies a couple gallons per minute. And to add to that, bubblers can be adjustable. So although the flow rate may be stamped on top, it can range from 30 to 120 gallons per hour. So again, very difficult to have a bubbler on the same system as a drip emitter that, that drip emitter will be providing a couple gallons per hour while that bubbler is then applying up to 120 gallons in that same hour. If you're using a garden hose, it really depends on your particular hose, the length, the water pressure available. A quick test that you can do is called the bucket test. A good rule of thumb is that the typical garden hose applies water between 9 and 17 gallons per minute when you're letting that water come out quickly. But unless you have a landscape contoured to allow water to pool and infiltrate in the correct areas, you'll likely need to slow that water flow to a trickle. So to do the bucket test, slow it to a trickle. You can basically take a pre-measured container, either a 5-gallon bucket or a 1-gallon bucket, and then just time how long it takes to fill that jug. For example, if it takes 2 minutes to fill the gallon jug, then you know the flow is about 1/2 gallon per minute or 30 gallons per hour. Now let's put it together and calculate that runtime. The first step to take is to group your plants by type of plant and by size. For each group of plants, list their valve or station number. That's just a way of saying, when you turn on that irrigation valve, which emitters are running, which plants are being watered. So, and you can just, if you want, even arbitrarily number them, just as long as you keep it consistent throughout the whole system, from when you're referring to them in this practice to when you're programming your controller. First step, again, group your plants by type and size, and then for each grouping, list the valve and station number, list the number of emitters or bubblers at each plant, and list the output that we talked about the last section, the gallons per hour output. If it's something like a bubbler that produces a certain amount of gallons per minute, just multiply that by 60 to convert that to gallons per hour. Let's look at an online tool that you can use in order to calculate this information. This is called the Landscape Watering Guide. To get to it, you would type landscapewateringguide.com, That's a friendly URL that will take you to the actual web page that has a much longer URL. And there are many resources here. We're going to focus on the interactive plant watering guide. We want to click on number 3, where you're putting it all together, and basically enter the information that I discussed in the last slide into this section. It's very intuitive. You can change the valve number by clicking on these arrows, or you can type. If you're looking at right in there, you can click and drag for these sections. You can you can select the plant size. You can put a little note here in case you have lots of groups of 8-foot trees, but you know, some of them are citrus, some of them are desert. You can put a little tag here to help you remember. You would type the emitters per plant here, and then the output in gallons per hour. If you are a hose waterer, I will show you how to do that next. First, we're going to focus on a drip system. So to save a little bit of time, I've pre-entered some information here. And in this case, we have 2 valves. So very, very normal, you know, for a residential home to have 1 or 2 valves. You may have more if you have a big system, but this is a pretty standard example. And it's also very, unfortunately, very common for there to be multiple plants on a single valve. So you can say, so basically when I turn on this irrigation valve, all 3 of these types of groupings of plants are being watered off of that one single valve. One is a group of 8-foot trees, 3-foot shrubs, 2 feet succulents, and then thankfully here we have the citrus on a different line. So then you enter the emitters per plant and the gallons per hour. You don't have to enter the gallons needed because that is already integrated in this system. Next, I'll show you an example that doesn't have that isn't online. So let's say you're more of a paper pencil person and you like to do the math yourself. You can write it out. You would just need that table C, gallons needed per plant, to get your estimated runtime. So you could calculate, and then this actually fills out. And there you can print your schedule and use that to program your controller. Notice the example down here is a little bit different. Oh, I don't think I discussed that. Let me show you very quickly what I meant earlier when it comes to converting from gallons per minute to gallons per hour. So for this example, it's actually 2 gallons per minute bubbler. So all we did was multiply by 60 and we got the 120 gallons per hour. Since bubblers are not generally measured in gallons per hour, that's just a quick little conversion just to fit into this column. All right, let's come back to this example. In this example, just to keep it simple, I have put that it's 4 gallons per hour, and then instead of a bubbler, it's just a drip emitter. But really what we're looking at here is valve 1. Valve 1 has a lot of issues. And the biggest one you may notice is you go to program valve 1. What are you supposed to program it to? You're supposed to program it to 2 hours, 4 hours, or 6 hours. Well, trees are harder to replace, so you could say, okay, I'm going to program it for 6 hours. But then, depending on how many shrubs and ground cover you have, you could be really overwatering these plants, which leads to waste and higher unnecessary costs. So what can we do to get this a little bit closer together? If you thought, well, I could up the emitters for my trees, you're absolutely correct. You could increase the number of emitters for these 8-foot trees, and with the output of 2 gallons per hour, we now can finish this within 4 hours, which is a lot closer. You can also decrease the output, replace those emitters for the succulents, so it's a little bit slower, and so this becomes a little bit fast or slower as well. So before it was 2 hours, and now because it's slower, it's going to take 4 hours. You still have some issues. Even though we can complete the watering in 4 hours, if you check our recommended frequency of watering, trees need watering less frequently than your shrubs. And then if they're desert trees, even less frequently than your ground cover cactus, just because they have bigger root systems. It stays wet longer. When you wet that root system, it's deeper. So ultimately, it'd be great to put these on different valves. But for now, at least you know every time you water, you're reaching the proper depth at approximately the same amount of time. For hoses and bubblers, you'll want to enter a different valve number for each grouping of plants, since the valve in this case is in essence just the hose bib. And then for the number of emitters, you'll enter one for each hose you can have running at the same time. And for the output gallons per hour, you're going to enter the results of your bucket test. So let's look at an example. So we have different valve numbers here. And then in terms of the number of emitters, if you have two hoses, you can enter different numbers of emitters if you wanted, but in most cases, you're going to enter just one that you can have running at the same time. And then we're going to come back to that example that we talked about before with 30 gallons per hour because it took 2 minutes to fill a 1 gallon bucket, and we multiplied that and got to 30 gallons per hour. So then we would click calculate, and it would give a very short runtime in hours. So we want to convert that to gallons per minute. So to do that, 0.3 times 60 equals 18 minutes, 0.5 times 60 equals 30 minutes. So you definitely will want to use passive rainwater harvesting, contouring your landscape so that you have depressions in the drip zone of larger plants to assist with infiltration. If you're using a hose or a bubbler, 18 minutes for that amount of water is just not, it's not slow enough. Our soil can't absorb water that fast. And so you need to have a way to help that water linger just long enough to infiltrate. Shouldn't be days and days, should be less than 24 hours. Ideally within 8 hours, that water should sink into the soil. But this is the reality of a hose or a bubbler system. It's highly customizable, lots bit more effort, and then you need to have some contouring to make sure water's not running off. Otherwise, you can water for even 1 hour, and potentially that water just runs off the landscape if it's not contoured correctly. Here are some other tips, landscape plants. If you have high plant density in your landscape, canopy edges are 2 feet apart or less, you may be able to apply less water per plant. And because of different watering needs, again, it is best to place trees and shrubs on separate valves. And as your landscape plants grow, water needs will change. So mark your calendar each year to reevaluate your landscape. Add emitters for those trees as they're getting bigger. Bring out those emitters as the drip lines get wider. Depending on how long it takes to water your system, you will need to you can use a very handy strategy called cycle and soak. Cycle and soak can be helpful with hose watering if you want to break that 18 minutes before you are able to contour that landscape. You can break it up by basically shutting that water off, waiting for it to sink in, and then turning it back on. With hose watering, though, really having some passive rainwater harvesting, contouring earthworks will help a lot. But this is really applicable to an automated drip irrigation system where you can program this type of thing within your system. You want to take that runtime that you've created through going through this process, pulling up the online calculator, and then you get this runtime. Whatever that runtime is, it's probably too long for your drip, even your drip system, just to be running. You want to water to the point of runoff. So, for example, if the plant watering calculator reveals that your system needs to run 4 hours to water those shrubs, and you observe that water runs off the landscape after 1 hour, then you can set 4 different start times. The day that you're watering, you're going to set 4 different start times, and you're going to water each for no more than 1 hour. Wait at least 30 minutes between those cycles. After that cycle finishes, we need another 30 minutes. And then you still water the same frequency. Once a week, for example, for non-desert shrubs, and once every 2 weeks for desert shrubs in the summertime. But the cycle and soak is not changing the frequency of watering. It's just breaking up that one watering session into shorter cycles so that you can give that soil time to accept the water. After you have completed your full watering cycle, you will want to check the depth and adjust your programming accordingly, because it's just an estimate. This whole system is based on a certain standard of soil, certain output. You may have done your test a little bit incorrectly. Maybe not everything is perfect, and that's okay. And that's why we do this watering depth check. Because if you're not reaching the proper depth, that will tell you have to increase your run time or do some cycle and soak to make sure the water is actually getting a chance to sink in and not running off. If you're getting more depth than you need, 2 feet for a bush, then you can adjust your runtime down and save a little bit of water because that water below that root zone is not being used. You can use a soil probe, a sharpened piece of rebar, or a very long screwdriver to test the watering depth at the drip line. Landscape Watering Basics goes into a little bit more detail about how to do this. I also want to mention the landscape watering guidelines. This is something we go into depth again in that other presentation. This is how often and how much to water different types of plants, whether they're native, desert adapted or high water use plants. But the bottom line that I want to emphasize, the key takeaway is that changing the frequency of watering your plants will save water, potentially can reduce 30 to 50% if you just make a commitment to change that frequency once every season or 4 times per year.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that bell icon so you never miss an update, and share it with your friends. It really helps the channel grow. See you in the next one.